Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Symphony Sparring Partners webinar on vendor perspectives on Open RAN. Our speakers today are Aji Ed, Head of Cloud RAN at Nokia, Geoff Hollingworth, CMO at Rakuten Symphony, John Baker, SVP of Business Development at Mavenir, and Monica Paolini, Principal at Symphony. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. In Sparring Partners, we watch our debaters discuss a topic live on video. We'd like to encourage your audience to participate in the conversation. So please share your comments and questions using the Q&A and chat functions on the Zoom taskbar. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. And our speakers will do their best to address questions as they go along and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So please feel free to ask questions at any point during the webinar. And with that, I will hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thanks so much for the introduction. And as always, it's a pleasure to be here. And to talk again about Open RAN, the last Sparring Partners was also on Open RAN. It's clearly a hot topic, and I decided to do another one because of the latest announcements from the operators. But what I wanted to do actually is to talk about the vendor. So the operators have, made the decision, some of them, on how to go ahead with Open RAN. And so the question is, what does that mean for the vendors? How is that, finally seeing that Open RAN is becoming more of a, wider deployed choice? How is that changing the way they operate? And so here, for all of you in the audience, you're familiar with Open RAN. So we're not going to start. We take for granted that we know what the basic tenets of Open RAN is, and we're going to go and see what happens from how is it the vendors see it. And today I have been very lucky to have a good selection of vendors and Rakuten Symphony to talk about it, and so to see what is the different approach to the market. So with that said, probably most of you already know the debaters today, but what we'll do is that we'll go and I will ask them to introduce themselves, and then we'll go with the description, with the conversation. And as Kendra said, feel free to ask questions as we go along. There is no Q&A at the end, so and also you don't have to ask questions. You can just say what you think and say your comments. That there is no issue. Just keep in mind that everybody sees it. With that in mind, why don't we start with John? How about you? You want to tell us?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. And my name is John Baker. For those that don't know me, I'm SVP of Business Development for Mavenir. I've been leading the Open RAN initiative for Mavenir now for 7 years. It's been a journey. So, and I think we're all heading in the right direction. So, looking forward to the debate today, and looking both on the upside and the downside of the opportunity.
Yes, and John recently was testifying in Congress, so maybe he'll tell us more about that. Geoff, what about you?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Geoff Hollingworth, working for Rakuten Symphony. I like the context John gave there. 7 years to get to this point. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion to see how we can make the 1 year move a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Geoff, some of you will know he has been on Sparring Partners earlier, and Ajin said he's a new guy. And congratulations, because you just got your new job right now. So congratulations, and tell us what it is.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. So I'm Aji Ed. I'm head of Cloud RAN. As you said, it's a new role for me, and Cloud RAN in Nokia. So I'm leading the Cloud RAN solution ecosystem and working with all the partners and creating the Cloud RAN solutions together. So obviously, I'm very delighted to be part of this conversation today. And obviously, we need to talk about what's happening around the industry. So looking forward to it.
Excellent. So, and I think this is going to be a good discussion today because even though different vendors are obviously competing with each other, we also collectively know each other, and after the discussions we go and have a beer or whatever. So it is actually people know and respect each other, and so it's going to be a good and honest conversation. So. Okay, let's get started with the reasons why I thought it would be a good idea to have this sparring partners on the vendors. So we saw, there was the announcement from AT&T, 1&1, and DT, Deutsche Telekom, about, basically signaling that they're ready to deploy Open RAN. However, one thing that has been remarked by many is that their selection was for a limited number of vendors, and the initial idea of Open RAN is that you'd have a huge number of vendors, and here and there. I think that that's actually a very good way forward, in the sense that you want to sort of open up the RAN gradually. You don't, especially if you are a brownfield operator, you want to move carefully as you move forward, which doesn't mean that you're not committed. That means that you want to keep control over how things go. But this is my view. I would like to hear what you guys think about it. Who wants to go first? Or do I want me to? Jeff, how about you? There you go.
Let me kick off then. I think the industry is in a very, I'll use the English word, interesting place. And I think our mobile network operator customers, for all of us, are in a really quite difficult position. On one hand, there is tremendous financial pressure. I mean, if you are almost a monopoly leading vendor for an industry, but you're announcing challenging financials and like layoffs, I think that's very indicative of an industry that is struggling and needs to change. And it's not an industry that hasn't got demand. It's an industry that isn't orchestrated the right way. But what we have to embrace, I think all of us on the supply side, is counter to that is a tremendous risk of failure for these people. They lose their jobs. It's not a casual business in the slightest. So I think what we're seeing, and we should celebrate after 7 years, as John says, that the whole industry doesn't question anymore moving in this direction. Everybody says it. But I think we have to respect and understand from the mobile network operator perspective that there are different models that balance different risk profiles with different skill sets, with different realities of deployment that they exist in. And none of them are wrong. It's choosing the right one for you as a business. And when I say you, the mobile network operator. And I'll say the last comment, and then we'll hopefully pass it over. I think the mobile network operators have a huge responsibility to decide what happens with Open RAN, because at the end of the day, it either becomes a tagline on status quo, or it becomes something that materially changes economics and business performance. Because it's just a technology of interfaces. And as we all know, you can do whatever you want to do with technology.
No, absolutely. And I think it's really important to keep in mind. And I guess that, in general, in wireless, we've seen, the last 2-3 decades, incredible growth. And it's kind of, when you think about it, maybe it's not really sustainable forever. So we need to sort of come to terms with this kind of constraints as well, which has nothing to do specifically with Open RAN.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that last comment from Jeff. I think what we've done as an industry now with Open RAN is put the power back to the procurement people. I think and I think to a certain extent, I don't think they realize yet what power they have back in their hands in terms of vendor choice and negotiation of how to put this lot together. I always say, look, unless you've got 2 vendors, showing interoperability, then you haven't got Open RAN. You know, single supplier solutions that have not been interoperated are not Open RAN, and you know, that's just one supplier's interpretation of a specification. And we've seen it. You know, we've done probably 14 radio interoperability tests. We've just recently done Nokia, and we did that in 4 days. But you know, at the end of the day, it still comes down to who, you know, how do you interpret the bits and the bytes in the specs? So you know, in the sense that you know, if you've got a single supplier solution, it's a proprietary solution until you know, until it's been interoperated with another supplier's components. But you know, coming back to the you know, the vendor choices that have been out there, you know, you've also got to take account of the point in time when decisions were made. You know, a lot has changed in the last 2 years in terms of, you know, O-RAN alliance specifications, interoperability testing, and everything else. So you know, you are going to see some you know, one-off supplier decisions out there. But you know, Dish, you know, and again, you know, that's the largest Open RAN network in the world. You know, is with 20,000 sites of 2 vendors that have shown two or more vendors, you know, that have shown interoperability. So it does work, but again, you know, I think, you know, they took the procurement side into their own hands and made sure that vendors did comply to O-RAN specs and did do interoperability testing. And this is really what it comes back to. And I think, you know, the biggest fear, and you know, that I have, and this is one I've been, you know, very vocal about on LinkedIn, is that you know, through commercial pressure of a vendor on an operator, we don't let things slip backwards. That, you know, operators accept proprietariness because somebody says, oh, well, I can't develop it in time. You know, it's not a case anymore of, well, you've got to wait for a large vendor to come along with a you know, a feature or functionality. You know, you've got choice out there now, and I think that's what the procurement organizations have got to get their arms around, is how to start to leverage choice, you know, safely, and you safely choose you know, multiple vendors in terms of the bits and pieces for their network going forward.
Absolutely. Ajay, what you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what John said. Having a single vendor in an Open RAN network is not necessarily open, right? Obviously, we're talking about multiple vendors. That is what is required to make it really open. So, but I think before moving into the discussion, I think it is still important to clarify some terminologies. Even though we talk about Open RAN, everybody knows Open RAN, but there's still a lot of confusion around what is Open RAN. From our perspective, we talk about Open RAN, which means it's all about both horizontal and vertical disaggregation. It is not just one level of disaggregation. What it means, it's about open front haul, it's about near real-time break, it's about HAPs, non-real-time break, RAPs, and all of this horizontal disaggregation. At the same time, we talk about vertically, which means the virtualization of the baseband, which means we talk about multiple server platforms, different cache layers, different automation tooling, and different RAN applications on top. So it's a collective thing. That's where Nokia, we launched this AnyRAN last year as a part of a holistic solution, what we brought in together. Now, it is worth to reflect on the progress, like John said, on the progress what we made in the last couple of years. You know, O-RAN Alliance, now comprising of more than 280 companies. But if you look at the contributions to the O-RAN Alliance standards, I'm happy to say, proud to say, Nokia is one of the leading vendors in terms of contributions to the O-RAN Alliance standards, which is important because that defines the specification to take things forward. And we have been co-chairing 3 of the working groups, the Open Front Haul, Near Real-Time Break, ONM. So that's, again, setting the foundation for the future. And as John said, working with the additional multiple vendors and partners, it's important to do the interoperability. We are done with the 5 vendors, including Mavenir, which we did it in, you know, super speed. Within 4 days, we are able to do the interoperability, which shows the kind of interfaces that we have aligned and O-RAN aligned specification. And exactly when you talk about operator space, we are talking about multiple operators. We are really working with them to really implement Open RAN, like Deutsche Telekom, like Docomo. So this Open RAN trend is there. So it needs to continue, and that requires some changes in the mindset from operators and likewise. At the same time, vertical disaggregation is important as well. When we talk about multiple partners we work with, you know, AWS, Microsoft, Google, HP, Dell, IBM, and so on, to create this joint solution together. So that's the motto, both end-to-end, both horizontal and vertical disaggregation. This needs to come forward.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you brought it up, the issue of the multiple layers, because, and this is why I've started to talk about Open RAN with a small o rather than capital O, because what is really fascinating about Open RAN is actually the vertical disaggregation is not just the U and CU, it's just opening the whole network. And that really makes it so much of a bigger enterprise. And in fact, if you see the ORAN Alliance is also expanding, over the year has been expanding its scope. And so when, people look at, how many CU and the U vendors you have, I think that this is just more than, it's actually the scope is so much bigger, which means that as a vendor, you also have to change. So it's not just having partners, you really have to work with them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In a way, yeah. Sorry.
I just saw a question come in from Stefan Pongratz that I think is a really
Mhm.
good question that I'd just like to address. Where is there a risk that we give operators too much power and it doesn't ensure a healthy supply chain? I think we have to. I'll go a little bit English here, in the sense that sometimes we get caught up in the celebration of Open RAN and the success. It's not a religious war. It's an economic model. It's an economic business we have to resolve. John equates, at the moment, I think you're up to about 300 different Open RAN compliant suppliers. If we don't open up the market and the supply chain, there'll be 5 again. And telecom will never attract another cluster of ecosystem suppliers. So there is this sense of being able to actually put together solutions that make economic sense, control the risk, and sustain that innovation. Otherwise, this innovation will disappear. And that's kind of the risk that we're playing on. So I'm not so sure I'm worried about operators having too much dominance and weakening the supply chain, because I think we're at such a swing of the pendulum over to the other direction, where the danger at the moment is that Open RAN actually is weakening the traditional supply chain even more dramatically.
Yeah, I could be sort of a little bit more adventurous in sort of this discussion, because I think to be honest, I think certain individuals have got it all wrong in terms of how they're thinking about the supply chain of what it really is. I think really, if you go back to what the beginnings of Open RAN was all about, the vendor, the operators really wanted choice. And if you go back 5 years, you look through the press articles of Deutsche Telekom and others, that they were frustrated with a 2-vendor supply chain, and to that extent, that was really sort of part of what propelled Open RAN to where it is today. Now, the other side of it is, I think we're living in an interesting week with the two, both Nokia and Ericsson sort of publishing their financial results, but in some respects, I think the whole supply chain and ecosystem is changing drastically, and I think those companies that are not preparing for a diversified supply chain, are going to be in for some interesting times. And I think what's going on here is that we've exposed all of the elements of the supply chain. Now, it's not to say that a lot of the suppliers that now are in the Open RAN supply chain weren't supplying the closed networks. They probably were, but we've exposed all of those suppliers and shifted the whole investment model for the RAN across a very large number of suppliers, such that as a company, you don't have to develop everything yourselves now. It's not a hardware model, and I think the fact that virtualization has really become a key part of the whole description of Open RAN, I think is very important. But you're living on the investment dollars of Intel, Dell, AMD, etc. You don't have to be a totally integrated company now to do this themselves. And I think the other piece, from on the supply side, that smaller companies are breaking up the revenue market share, in a sense that, you know, it's smaller companies, you know, it's can take smaller contracts at a different value level than, you know, what's necessarily acceptable today to the incumbents, because you know, there's a whole different profitability model that exists on the smaller companies that doesn't on the larger companies. So I think we're right at the front end, and, you know, and certainly we're seeing the cracks, you know, in this week with, you know, statements like, well, this is not acceptable, and, you know, well, it's maybe not acceptable to you, but it's acceptable to a lot of smaller companies that can now play. And I think that's what we've done, is that we've generated some turbulence in the marketplace. And, you know, I had a boss at one point in time and said to me, look, you know, if you can never cut fast enough when these things start to happen in terms of getting, you know, restructuring organizations. And I think unless people are planning forward, then, you know, that's the situation they're going to be in. They're always going to be looking backwards and looking forwards. And I think the small companies, you know, have a real opportunity. And I think, you know, it's reflected. I do have, you know, points of conflict, if you like, with the way the analysts are reporting the numbers. I don't agree with some of the numbers that are out there, and you know, because they're not being calculated correctly. And you know, but you know, we'll see how that all develops. But you know, the Open RAN is about the 130 odd vendors, etc., or 300 vendors, and how that market share is split across those 300 vendors. So, you know, there's a lot in there to unpack. But I think, you know, we're right at the front end of the industry, you know, radically changing to become one of multiple sources of supply in the industry.
Yeah, I really want to say some.
Yeah, maybe I will just talk about. I think there was one more question on the chat.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Let me read it, because then when people listen it online, they don't see the chat. So I'm gonna read it. And it's a question from Arno. It's about smaller companies might serve smaller opportunities, but are these economically viable? Hundreds of RU suppliers are not expanding the market. They might just fragment it. And actually, this was something that I wanted to follow up on what John said. And so I think that on one hand, it's true that with Open RAN, you have a wider choice of vendors. Although I think that that's also, it's not just Open RAN, it's also virtualization that it's helping. So the combination of the two is actually crucial, both to the success of Open RAN, but also to the disaggregation part. But at the same time, you know, volumes still matter, and so operators are still going to, and we see in the recent announcements that they're still going for big suppliers. So I think that yes, it is true that the small suppliers are encouraged, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have everybody. So there is a risk of fragmentation. But I don't think that it's actually really happening, because operators are still going to go for vendors that are, so to say, reliable in terms of size. So I don't know, Ajay, what is that you're saying there?
Yeah, maybe let me take this. See, I think one of the things what we need to really remember is when we're talking about operators implementing Open RAN or Cloud RAN network, we are talking about current reality. That is, most of the networks are brownfield today. So that means they have a very highly performing systems, which is built with purpose-built whatever is today, right? That's a reality. So when we bring Cloud RAN or Open RAN into those network, there are some important considerations that we need to make. Why I'm coming to the number of vendors from that perspective, because important consideration, because we need to make sure of the performance. We need to make sure of the feature parity, because until you are able to bring the list of features, set of features which are already available with the purpose built on the existing network, you cannot implement Cloud RAN, Open RAN effectively into the network, because that's like you are comparing a Formula One car with a regular sedan kind of features, end user experience. That's a kind of a scenario we talk about, right? So this is a fundamental thing that defines. I agree with what John and Geoff said. I think this opens up opportunity for different players, as long as there is a certain ground level rules followed in terms of the openness, number one. Number two is the kind of a feature set richness, which we can bring it to the table. In terms of performance, we can bring it to the table. In terms of flexibility, we talk about flexibility because flexibility is the key all about. And the flexibility is spanning across end-to-end value chain. It's also about the silicon architectures that you should not get locked with the one silicon architecture. You should be having multiple options, whether be it x86, be it ARM, be it different cache layers, be it any radio vendors, and so on. So this flexibility is important. And that's where I come back to what we are planning to do, or we are doing it already since last year, in terms of the AnyRAN, that we bring the flexibility, bring the feature parity from day one. And that's the only way I see it. Even if you consider the smaller players, that yes, there's an opportunity, but they need to be effective in terms of bringing the feature set, bringing the performance to the same level to introduce this Cloud RAN into the network or Open RAN into the network.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the other questions, but before we go to the questions from the audience, I wanted to sort of follow up on what you said in terms of chipset choice, because I think that there is a sense in which we focus on opening the CU and DU and front hall interface and all that, which is very good. But then the risk is that we might create a bottleneck some other places where you might have a more limited choice at the chipset level. And I think that what we're seeing right now, which I think is very interesting, is that is also starting to break, in the sense that we're seeing more openness there as well.
Yep.
And it's not the front hall interface, it's just way beyond that. And how important do you think that is? And how, as a vendor, how do you work with that part?
I think certainly from a Mavenir perspective, it's really, keeping an eye on, other companies' developments and other companies' programs. We've been very open about, the implementation, whether it be Intel, NVIDIA, there are solutions coming along, and and there will be a fit commercially and technically for some of this. Now, you've got to stand back again and realize, and part of my testimony in Congress last week was sort of, Open RAN has actually been a huge success. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, actually, Rakuten and ourselves couldn't go sell to a different operator, and we were completely locked out. And to that extent, now you've got 7 other end-to-end system providers that are out there supplying potential systems into mobile operators. Now, the other side of it is, and I think this is where some caution in terms of expectations needs to be really there, that Open RAN is not a revolution. Operators have built networks, invested money, they're vendor locked on contracts and stuff like that, and it's going to take time for this to truly evolve. And then a comment on this whole feature set. I think there's been 2 independent drive tests done by Signals Research, Michael Therlander's group, that compares both Mavenir and Samsung against other competitors' networks, and they're in some respects they're equal and better, and in terms of performance. So this whole feature set performance issue is really sort of becoming a non-issue. That the smaller suppliers can supply this stuff, and I've sort of put ourselves in that smaller supplier bracket. That you can deliver this stuff, and it really comes down to the procurement organizations, if you like, now getting on board and realizing what they can do both commercially and technically. And I think that's where the next year is going to be. It's really about the commercial aspects of Open RAN, not none of this technical feature stuff anymore. It's what can you deliver on time, and can you meet the profitability expectations of what the operators are really looking for.
Maybe I can add a couple of words to it. I think it's important, of course, commercially. I mean, this is the commercial aspects are driving the most of the discussions from an operator standpoint. But let's keep in mind that as I said, so the introduction is critical from a Cloud RAN, Open RAN perspective, because we need to offer the same performance. So I'm not debating on it is important, but at the same time, it is at least from an introduction and sustainability perspective, it is critical. That is that we have the similar performance from that perspective. So, but when it comes to the silicon architecture, the split, what you mentioned, it is, yes, it is providing different options to our customers, like whether it is energy efficiency, because it's all about energy efficiency is one of the prime drivers right now. So multiple silicon architecture that can provide different options, be it energy efficiency, be it capacity, be it performance. So it's all about flexibility and options that we can give it to the customers. So.
Yeah, I think I'd like to come back to something that we seem to forget, and John brought it up. Open RAN was started by the mobile network operators. It wasn't a vendor-led initiative because they wanted choice and they wanted a different economic supply chain. And somehow we've ended up in an industry where it feels like the vendors who believe them are pushing a story to fix that problem. And I think we have to embrace the fact that there's a huge responsibility on the network operator side to then want to buy a different way, because that's what they started the initiative for. At the same time, there's real challenges and obstacles in doing that, because the center of responsibility for supply moves. So it's not only a procurement issue, it's actually and it's not a technology issue, it's a delivery, performance, scale issue into the actual networks, because no one else can afford that. And if you get that wrong, then it's more expensive. So there's I think one discussion that we should be having, which is a challenge. If you've noticed, Rakuten didn't have a problem with this because we put things together in software. That's who we are. That's what we do. Dish has had a similar culture. That's not the competence or the working model that exists in most brownfields that we see. They usually outsource that, and they're not buying technology. They're buying insurance for successful rollout and delivery. That has to cope with the past as well. So I'd like to keep the conversation that somehow we need to move the industry really quickly, but it has to be realistic, and we have to appreciate the challenges in making that change.
Which I think is the reason why I personally think that you don't want to see the brownfields to move too quickly, because the change is so deep, and it's not just a technology change, it's a cultural change. It's the change in the way they operate, and that's, even though the technology is there to do it overnight, I think it's gonna take a little bit longer, because even though it is driven by the operators and the operators want to change is hard for everybody.
But the winners will be the ones that move as quickly as possible without failing.
Yeah.
So it's walking that tightrope. Now we're an industry that is risk adverse, so that tightrope ends up being not a tightrope, it ends up being a 4-lane highway that we're not getting off. So how do you start to challenge the status quo in an operational model on the customer side to force the vendors to actually be realistic about fitting into that? And there are examples of this starting, but we're 7 years in. If we go back 7 years and look at the state of technology elsewhere, I mean, maybe we're starting to do cloud as an industry. We're 15 years in on that one.
Yep.
So Geoff, you think that the operators are not moving quickly enough, and I think that I sympathize with that, but I can also see the other argument that virtualization took forever. Other industries are not as fast either. So, what about Aji? What do you think? Do you think mobile operators are moving fast enough in your view?
Yeah, I think I agree with Geoff and John on that. I think the speed is not enough, in my view, and there are multiple reasons we can think of why it is so. But at the same time, I think it calls for a fundamental change in the mindset, as you mentioned. We need to really look at what is required. I think there are multiple. I mean, challenges that we need to address. I think that we need to address in the realistic way. One of them thing is the mindset change in the organization itself, because we're talking about forget all the automation, AI, and the use cases coming onto the edge, etc., which are more TCO driven. What we can do as a part of while we implementing Cloud Run, but it also calls for some fundamental change in terms of upskilling the resources, upskilling the workforce. Because we talk about a kind of integration of, when we talk about Open RAN and Cloud RAN, integration of the cloud native principles with the RAN network. And that requires some change in terms of competence build-up, expertise build-up within the organization. Not only, I'm just not talking about operators, but also from the vendor landscape. We need to really build this competence, and this is what we need to prepare for. One key question would be, how do I train my people? Whether should I train the RAN engineers to IT skilled, or should I train my IT skilled engineers, cloud engineers to the RAN? There is no single answer to that question. So it is like the truth lies in between. So we might have to do both. We might have to retrain our workforce to do both. I'm saying we means vendor, operator alike, because why it is so? Because that is answering to the question of integration topic. What is one of the questions came there? System integration is a topic there that leads to these questions like who will own the integration? Because if it is operators owning it, because there are some cases we are seeing operators like tier 1 operator, like Docomo, they are planning to do it. And I think Rakuten did that the same before. So planning to do the integration by themselves, which means they have to build up the competency. They need to have an R&D level expertise. It's not necessarily always possible with all our operator organization. So then it leads to other approaches on the system integration, whether it is vendor driven. It could be like a baseband provider, like any of the vendors, like Nokia, Mavenir, any of them, like could be the system integrator, which again, that organization needs to build up the expertise. Because why baseband provider? Because baseband is the integral part of this whole solution, and you need to ensure the SLA and performance. So it calls for a change in the upskilling the resources workforce because of the multiple challenges, the integration and alike.
Absolutely, and I think it's crucial to keep in mind that whatever solution is going to be the same for everybody, and that's the beauty. I mean, that's the whole point, right? To have the flexibility so that you find this as an operator, and I guess as a vendor too, you find the solution that works better for you, which might not be the same for another. So let's go back to some of the questions from the audience, and we have two that are related to the sort of system integration and the management. So Yvonne asks about, don't you think that the responsibility of integrating a multi-vendor network is something that operators try to avoid, for instance, because of this cost of skills for building a test lab? Is that an obstacle to the adoption of a truly open RAN? So that's the question, is that how much do they want to take? And that sort of is tied with the system integration part. And Timothy has a question about who will lead the integration and manage the life cycle of software and hardware. Not all operators have the resources to manage this complexity. And also, I would say not only the resources, but they might not want to do it. Is it worth it for them to do it? Because traditionally, it would be the main RAN vendor that would do effectively the system integration, or most of it. And now they have the option of doing it themselves, which I think it's a very interesting idea, because what that means, the value of a network is how you operate it. It's not just a detail. It's really where you differentiate from the other operators. So it's something that you probably want to have more of control on. And that's what Open RAN explicitly not only allows you, but you kind of have to do it, because you have to pull all the pieces together. And I think that it's highly empowering for operators and enables them to differentiate from each other. So how do you see that? And I got into trouble at some point a few years ago, because I said, one potential issue is that if an operator doesn't do system integration, doesn't have the vendor doing it, but they go to a system integrator, that system integrator might become the gatekeeper in the sense that the system integrator only works with some vendors, and therefore that limits the choice. So the flexibility that an operator would want to have with Open RAN, it's basically gone because of the selection of a system integrator. Do you see that as a potential issue, or how do you view the whole system integration bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're trying to force fit a change in the ecosystem into existing models that have been around for 10, 20 years. I've built multiple networks around the world, and in the end, that you can still buy a whole system from a single vendor, but the operator still takes project management, ownership of some of this stuff in terms of the civil works and stuff like that. So in reality, I think there's little change that's going to happen with a lot of the operators, and I think what softwareization has done to mobile networks going forward is it's changed the way in which integration is actually happening. We were putting in Dish like 1,000 sites a day coming on air because at the end of the day, your hardware installers were putting the equipment out there. Once it was connected in power, everything was being done with continuous integration, continuous deployment through software. And previously that may have been done with technicians going to sites and stuff like that. So the model of building a network is now changing. And then from a system integration perspective, if you look back at the early days of Wi-Fi, when Wi-Fi came, I think I bought my first Wi-Fi NIC card in 2001, I think it was, when the first ones were really coming out there. And you look at the challenges that were going on with integrating standalone Wi-Fi networks to the internet. I think all those issues are slowly sort of echoing through again in the Open RAN ecosystem. And at the end of the day, we will get to a plug and play scenario. I've sort of got great confidence that the industry will get to a plug and play, and system integration will, be greatly eased. And so I think it's important to look at the discontinuities that are now appearing in the marketplace. Look, operators are not profitable. System integration needs to be done in a highly efficient way. Who takes over the vendor choice? There's multiple things out there that are all all presenting change in the marketplace. And I think the longer we keep saying, oh well, we're trying to force fit this into an existing model, then we're just putting unnecessary hurdles in front of us. And I think we are seeing operators now, why have operators cut back on the spending? 5G standalone has been a disappointment, if you like, in terms of the industry. Now, actually, 5G standalone, in going to 5G standalone, is a great opportunity to change vendors, because you can build a complete 5G standalone overlay network. And so there's a number of discontinuities out there. Operators, I think, and I'm putting my crystal ball out there, but I'd like to hear comments. But I think operators are actually sitting back and thinking about what do they want to do next. And I think that's probably why we're seeing this lack of spending going on with mobile operators in the industry.
Just thinking what's ahead.
Yeah.
I hope that's true. I think the example that John just gave of actually the upside of from a business point of view of implementing these technologies actually turns up in the operational efficiency and speed. So Rakuten did this for exactly the same reasons. It's one system design that operates across all of the infrastructure and is highly automated. So we were doing similar, 600, 800,000 at the peak rollouts. And I don't think so. I think the other insight is that not all operators have the same desires, the same kind of opportunities. So the big operators can maybe invest in much different ways than smaller operators that need to consider what they're doing. But one shift that I would recommend or the whole industry considers is it is a move of ownership in system design from the supply side to the operator side. And it's an opportunity then to design something that actually is much more efficient and much more independent of vendors. And as long as you understand and own that system design, then you can choose to outsource that to who you would like to do. But you have to hold that outsourcing accountable. You can't let that outsourcing then control your choices in the future. And I think that's healthy. I think that's how businesses, successful businesses, take responsibility to do something, to control their own destiny. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, maybe let me add a couple of words there. I think, yes, I agree. I think it's all about who takes accountability at the end. And operators would be in a best position to take the accountability or responsibility at the end, because they have the full picture about the end-to-end subsystems, what vendors, and what kind of solutions are brought in. But of course, practically speaking, obviously, the truth lies somewhere in between, meaning some of the operators, I agree, some of the operators, leading players, tier 1 operators, they have the capability to do this system integration by themselves. But not many of them are, or maybe even in the tier 1 operators, for example, one of them, European operators, head of Open RAN, told us directly, their option is somewhere in between, meaning option 1 and 2, what I mentioned before, that is like the operators owning the system integration, and a subsystem provider, like a baseband provider, is owning the system integration, but somewhere in between. That is, they're able to do like some of the responsibilities from the system integration perspective, and some of it is given to the baseband provider as a kind of a splitting the responsibility between these players. So this kind of approach is also possible, but ideally, yes, it has to move into a direction where there is a full accountability lies with somebody who can drive this forward.
Absolutely, and I guess the issue about accountability and with disaggregation, you can disaggregate in whichever way you see fit. So, and I think that's going back to what John was saying before, that we should just really try to move out of the way we usually think about it. In everything, it's possible to some extent. Things that have not been tried before, some will work, some will not, and the fact that we have the operators have the opportunity to try in of itself, it's a great thing, and it's sort of like it's like really moving to a more mature state. Now let's go to some of the other questions. There is a question here from Alexander. He asks, should a large operator aim to have a common unified architecture across its network or radio sites using the same suppliers and system, or should they encourage supplier diversity across its network? Now, let me just first say one thing, is that all the mobile networks have been multiple vendors already, except that they would be just, each city would be a different vendor, but it's not like multi-vendor is anything, broadly new, radically new. It's the way the multi-network, the multi-vendors, the multiple vendors are working with each other that is different. But maybe you can address the question of how do you see that changing? And from a vendor perspective, how is that you propose to the operator? Because even you might have different solutions, different architectures for different environments. How do you see that? Who wants to?
Yeah, let me, because this is something very close to the heart. The driving force here, at least from our design perspective, is not being limited by single supplier equipment. What you do want is to have a single operational model that scales. The one thing that ourselves and Dish have proven is that we've rolled out and accelerated, and this technology works. I saw the recent analyst report, I can't remember the gentleman's name, about Dish, where the network's great. In actual fact, now it's a question of actually increasing the subscriber base. And that's exactly where Rakuten Mobile is in Japan. And also both companies have tremendously small workforces running that network because it's all highly optimized automated. So, and then the last thing is that we do have a bigger problem in the industry is that we've got to attach to new revenues to actually supply any of this. 80% of network traffic is indoor and nomadic, not macro. Now that indoor coverage and nomadic coverage is much more like the PC market, where you get specialized vendors going into certain situations for certain scenarios. You want to be able to manage every single coverage area in the same way and embrace those different niche suppliers to have choice. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we've done in Rakuten, and we feel pretty good about that because it's working. And as the speed of integration, of validation of the radio units goes down, it just reinforces the model.
Yeah. No, I think adding to that, I think the other point, and I think there's a question in there that about certification, and I think this is the one challenge area that really is still got to be resolved, is about a common certification label for all O-RAN implementations. And I think that is going to be the essence of allowing different network architectures, because operators want to know that what they're buying performs to a specification. And and as I've said publicly, that every vendor should implement the minimum defined requirements from the O-RAN Alliance, and those minimum defined requirements are basically what gets certified. And so because this then takes away the need for labs and the need to go test everybody's product. That can be done like we do for radios today under ETSI. You take them to an independent lab, they get independently verified, and this should happen with O-RAN product. And to that extent, I think there's 18 labs out there today that are capable of doing certification or attempting to do certification. And I think that will then clean up a lot of the ecosystem so that these really become building blocks. And I say, we've got, if you look backwards, you can take the analogy of cable internet and Wi-Fi access points. We went through the pain of all of that, and the industry cleaned that up. And I think the mobile industry is in catch-up mode, if you like, in the sense of just getting into all of those issues. But I think the great thing is that there's a lot of opportunity out there for everybody, and everybody's sort of worried about job losses. But I got to be honest, they may be moving from vendor jobs to operator jobs, and there's plenty of work out there for everybody, and plenty to learn. So I think I think the industry's got a bright future. I think we just must stop thinking about it as the past and look forward to what needs to get done to make operators profitable, because that's really without an operator business model that's profitable, you don't have anything anyway. We're all chasing rabbits.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think it's all about operators, the financials, and how we can make it profitable. Yeah. I think just want to highlight that this is precisely, we talk about the different options, and we want to give as many options as possible to operator customers. Whether it's enterprise or operators, we want to give as many options, and that's where we believe a strong partnership ecosystem is important. We believe in the power. For example, I talked about interoperability with the multiple vendors in terms of radio and baseband together, and at the same time we work with the multiple industry partners to create the joint solution. For example, AWS, Microsoft, Google's. So we bring it together. So we strongly believe in this power, because at the end of the day, we need to give all these different options. Why different option? Different reason. Energy efficiency, capacity, whatever reason, if you talk about it. So it's all about giving the options with the partnership, and we strongly advocate that using our INIRAN and the partnership model that we are built in.
Yeah, so we have a lot of questions, and we're not going to be able to go through all of them, but I wanted to sort of try to combine a couple of them and go back to what John said at the beginning about the market forecasts. And so the question is about the future and the future of Open RAN and implementation. So one question is about, should we expect industrial scale deployment in 2024-25 or not? And so this is a question, but my secondary question on top of that is, how do we count that? Which is what John was said at the beginning, that the forecasts from the analyst, he doesn't agree with some of them. And I'm an analyst, but I don't know what market forecasts are, so I don't have to take it personally. But I do see exactly the point, because as Open RAN becomes more of a wider concept, does it even make sense to forecast Open RAN as a separate thing? Because it's really hard if you deploy something that it's fully complies with the specifications, but you can deploy it in a single vendor proprietary manner, or you can deploy something that is upgradable to Open RAN. So you don't deploy those Open RAN today, but you move it to Open RAN in a year. What does it count? So from a market forecast and deployment, just counting the the deployments out there, it doesn't even make sense if we are just moving in that direction. So the question to you is that, when are we going to see the industrial scale deployments, and how do we count them? How do we define something as industrial scale or not, or Open RAN or not? Is it really a clear cut line? So, John, why don't you take that first, since you started it?
Yeah, I'll try and put some color on this market analysis piece, because I think what you've got is take 130 suppliers, and they're all putting their piece in there, and I think you've got a lot of cross technologies that have not been reported before. So as an example, and this is not you can take a computing platform from a Dell or an HP, and they'll report their sales through other market means. Now in reality, that's a part of an O-RAN system, right? And it's a part of an O-RAN system sale, and yet you can't just take the software piece of O-RAN and say that's the O-RAN market. I think to be honest, that a lot of the figures that are out there today are optimistic on the closed RAN and pessimistic on the Open RAN side, which are completely upside down, because components and of these systems are not being reported correctly. And to that extent, I think the analysts have got to find a way to bring in the total ecosystem. I think some analysts, and I'm probably gonna, and these guys know who I'm talking about as well. So that they really need to come to a better way of collecting this information to present to the industry. But you're right. At the end of the day, how do you value a piece of software that goes in Amazon Cloud as part of the Open RAN system, where previously that had been done, with customized hardware, right? So the complete value of the ecosystem is changing. There's no direct comparison, and that's why I come back to the initial point that smaller companies will survive and be very profitable in these architectures and different solutions, because they can concentrate on their technology that they're good at. Software providers like ourselves, we just concentrate on software. We'll make software happen, and Dell and HP will constantly focus on making servers happen, right? Previously, that was all done by one company. No longer. So the models have got to change. The ecosystem's changing, and the profitability is changing. So that's my two penny worth, and I'm happy to have another debate on all of that, because I could spend the next 2 hours on it.
Yeah, I think that would actually be worth spending a lot of time to just sort of think about how we count, how we measure things.
Mm-hmm.
Geoff, any comments on that?
I don't think it's an interesting metric whatsoever. It's irrelevant. I think the interesting metric is OPEX going down, is time to market decreasing, and is competitiveness on the top line going up. And what we have seen is that the people that adopt these new technologies, of which Open RAN is one, cloud, virtual, the disaggregation that Ajay was mentioning, you get tremendously different business results. So the world-leading Open RAN vendor apparently has deployed over 1 million base stations that are Open RAN compliant already, because the standard changed. So I think we're chasing a false ghost with those market share, because I
tend to agree. I think the trouble is the stock market, and investors sort of look at the total revenue numbers, and they've got to be looked at in a different way.
And I think that by doing this, you define Open RAN in such a narrow way that it's kind of becomes impossible for anybody to. It's just like it creates a circle which is just not very healthy for anybody involved.
Exactly.
Because you find, the whole point of Open RAN is flexibility, and then you sort of create a way to classify it as completely non-flexible. Yeah. And so where are we going? You know, we're kind of, it seems like a little bit of self-defeating.
Yeah, we're still trying to fit square pegs in round holes, and that ain't going to work much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, coming back to the same point before, that a vendor or network with a single vendor is not necessarily Open RAN, you know. So it is, we can of course claim it, but there's not necessarily Open RAN because it doesn't show the flexibility at all. Yeah, so I think commercial implementation, you are right. I mean, I think it depends on all these factors, and we definitely see good momentum with customers, and that we just published one case study with A1 Bulgaria customer today, just today morning. So that is really talking about what are these benefits of moving to Cloud RAN in terms of how we can exactly kind of deploy this in an environment where we have a brownfield and the Cloud RAN coming into picture together, how we can manage this customer experiences and so on. So there are a lot of interesting case studies coming up from customers, and we will see good momentum this year in terms of Cloud RAN and Open RAN implementation.
And that takes us at the top of the hour, and we need to give it back to Kendra. But Adi, John, and Geoff, thank you so much for participating, and all of you in the audience. Sorry we couldn't get through all the questions, but they were all great questions. So thank you guys, and Kendra, back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. That will conclude our webinar for today. Thanks again to our speakers for that great conversation, and to our audience members for those wonderful questions. A recorded version of our webinar will be available at sensafili.com in the coming days, so check back there. And we have another Sparring Partners coming up February 13th, and registration for that event will be available at sensafili.com also. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.